Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Today's guest is an author and writer, most known for his creation of Cobalt City. He does lots of anthologies, novels, and so much more. Please welcome Nathan Crowder to Epic Realms. How you doing?
Pretty good. Howdy, everyone.
So, while the superhero theme Cobalt City is a huge part of your works,
Hmm.
your early life, I should say, was, from what I understand, influenced by D&D. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Can you kind
yeah.
of give us a glimpse into that time of your life?
Um, I went to a summer science camp when I was 12 years old, and one of just to give an idea of how old I am, um, there were a couple kids in the class in the thing who were using Basic to program character generation, character creators in Basic, and that was my first exposure to Dungeons and Dragons, and I started playing it that weekend,
Okay.
and I've been playing it for 34 years. Ever since I've been all through the editions, and a whole bunch of, but and although I've gone off to other different sorts of games, um, um, D&D has always had a special place in my heart. Yeah.
How
My
much
first
did
character was a dwarf barbarian, which apparently you can't do by the rules. So I've always been a lawbreaker.
I was a rule breaker? I mean, you can now, but
Well,
back
yeah,
then,
now, yeah.
back then, how did D&D shape you as a person and as a writer? Did that start to happen earlier on, or was it later that you kind of reflected and went, "Hey, wait a second"?
I think it was a little bit later. I did want to start writing. My desire to start writing, the first book I tried writing corresponded pretty right around where I started playing games and running games. Um, but I don't know if there was necessarily direct correlation. I think it was just an opportunity for me to engage in. It's like, okay, I can enjoy fantasy stories that I make up, whether they make them up in a game where I'm playing with other people or I make them up in my writing. And for the most part, when I was writing early on, I was writing horror short fiction. I really wasn't writing fantasy.
Okay.
I never really got the grasp for writing fantasy until I was much older. But yeah, then was a point when I looked back and I realized that being able to structure that and that problem solving sort of aspect to it was really very, very useful for the writing part.
Did you have other influences in for writing growing up as a kid?
Well, my dad was a librarian,
That helps.
and yeah, it helps. It helps. My mom ran a daycare, so we were constantly reading stories to the kids. So I grew up around a lot of books, and I just always loved books. And my dad loved stories, so he'd introduce me to some of his old favorite movies and television shows. And so I just had this love of stories. Um, so I think that was a real big factor for me. Is I just yeah, I just love the idea of stories.
When we were talking earlier a little bit about the D&D aspect,
Hmm.
and we're talking about that time in your life, did D&D ever interfere with like schools? Did D&D ever cause struggles? What were your parents' thoughts on D&D? Because I kind of have an idea of the era, right?
Yeah. Um, my dad didn't understand it. They were both pretty liberal. None of this satanic panic stuff. We
Okay.
didn't have any of that. There was sometimes in the town there was some issue of it, but they never tried to ban it anywhere. Mostly, my dad just didn't understand what it was about, and to the extent that he bought a book on the subculture of role playing games for the college library where he worked, so that he could read it and try to figure me out. And he never read it. I read it. Um, still didn't figure me out. But um, yeah, we were certainly ostracized. I mean, there was certainly this aspect of like, well, those are the geeks, those are the nerds. But
Right.
I was unknowledgeable. I did theater. I was in choir. Like there were a lot, there were a lot of things you could point to and say, oh, he's different.
Right.
So role playing wasn't a thing. I didn't have problems. I think the biggest problem was when I would draw maps on the dungeon maps instead of doing homework. That was, I think, the biggest problem.
Amen to that. I'm right there with you.
Amen to that. Yeah, got to fill every square on that graph paper.
What books did you read a lot as a kid? Your dad was a librarian, so you had access to everything, I'm assuming.
I did. I did have access. Yeah, and I I started off reading pretty much anything, like some of the big series like Chronicles of Narnia. There was this, I think it's called Matthew Mooney, this young adult, this early grade chapter book about a boy who lives on Mars and with Jules Pfeiffer art. But the stuff I really gravitated towards, I loved compilations of like Gone Wilson and Doonesbury and comics like that. Some of the more weird or political, but stuff like that. And then I'd get up to go up to the library to hang out with my dad on the evenings when my mom had other stuff going on and we couldn't be left alone. And right around from where the children's books were, which I felt I'd outgrown, they had these big oversized books, and they had this huge red bound, I still remember, red bound oversized book about horror cinema. And it was just full of photos of like London After Midnight and The Black Cat and all these classics of horror cinema. And so I, even in an early age, I was enjoying the nonfiction like that, and it sort of drew me into true haunting stories and um, alien abduction stories and all of the weird paranormal stuff. And
I mean, all of the awesome paranormal stuff, all the
awesome, yeah,
awesome paranormal stuff.
it was the 70s. It was the era of In Search Of. I mean,
Right,
everyone. I grew up being afraid of the Bermuda Triangle, quicksand, and crystal skulls. Man,
right.
those were legitimate fears. So I sort of grew up with this love of weird and ghosts and UFOs and things, and that was reflected in the fiction I started picking up, and then I started getting to Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, Three Investigators, love the Three Investigators, and but yeah, I just kept moving. My focus on what I was reading fiction wise changed every year, every 2 years or so.
So going from a fan of reading to actually like writing,
Mhm.
how does that form? Where do you go from being a fan of it and you start writing and then eventually kind of get your foot in the door getting published?
Um, the first book I ever tried writing, I was in seventh grade, and it was kind of an author insert fantasy revision. That it was a science fantasy with where King Arthur was the bad guy and Merlin was this evil dick who sort of manipulated him, and Lancelot had recruited this main character to sort of help fight this war on this alternate planet. And I tried writing this book in pencil, by the way, in
Right.
pencil on lined paper, and that was my first thing. Just because I just something about I just felt Merlin was very manipulative, and I didn't like that. I'm like, why is he the hero?
Yeah.
Why is he the good guy? And I kind of liked countering that, and that's kind of been reflected in the later work. That was a huge impact on Ink Calls to Ink when I wrote that, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, because it was me taking a look at characters who didn't get a fair shake and making them the heroes they needed to be.
Yeah. That's cool. What steps did you have to take? Did you have to like jump through any hoops, or were there big setbacks, or was it just like you're
It
in
was
there and then you're going?
it was a lot of start and go. Like I'd work on something for a while, I'd feel really good about it, and I was working on horror short stories for a big chunk of time up through high school and trying to send them out, and it was just rejection, 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 and I kind of stopped doing it. Then I took a screenwriting class in college and I tried writing screenplays. I've got a friend who writes theater, lives in Cleveland, and he's had a bunch of shows produced. He makes his living doing it.
Yeah.
And we co-wrote a couple screenplays, and I liked that. When I moved up to Seattle, I thought, that's it, screenplays, I'm gonna do that. No, it was just that was never gonna happen.
Yeah.
And but I liked the idea of keep going back to writing, and then I got involved. I started running a Mutants and Masterminds game that I absolutely loved, and I had a story I really wanted to tell that I couldn't tell in a game setting because it involved everyone being split up, and just for practical purposes, that wasn't going to happen. So I wrote it, and that was my first novel. That was the first novel I ever finished. It was because I needed to tell a story with these characters that I loved, and I don't think I've really looked back since then. I've slowed down, but every once in a while, but I don't think I've ever stopped considering myself a writer or trying to write since then. So it's
Yeah.
been what 20 plus years now.
That's awesome. And shout out to Steve Kenson who did Mutants and Masterminds, right?
Yeah,
Love
yeah,
that system. One of my favorite
it's
superhero systems out there.
very solid. As I got near to the end of it, I actually near to the end of the book, I reached out to them and said, "Hey, are you guys thinking about doing any fiction for publishing any fiction for Mutants Masterminds?" And they're like, "No, we're not doing that." I'm like, "Okay." And so I created Cobalt City, and I just reskinned the setting, and I created my own setting and I wasn't using any of their characters or anything recognizable as that, but they were all characters that were built on that game system.
Yeah.
Um, and that's been the spine of Cobalt City pretty much ever since.
Yeah. And you did get to work for some of their stuff, right? You did get to
I,
work in some of their books.
I did have a short story in one of their collections featuring oh, I can't even remember his name, but the archer character that was established in the universe. Because I've always liked archers. I grew up as a Green Arrow fan,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it was really fun to write that. But I think it's the only thing I've really done with them. And I'm always open to do more now that they're doing fiction. So
Yeah, for sure. How did how did you look at Cobalt City and go, this is since I got all these characters, I want to put them together in this story, right?
mm.
How did you look at putting that together from a, from a person sitting back and going, okay, these are the characters I got to follow, or this is how I'm going to structure this book, knowing what it's going to be?
Well, I had some set characters I needed to use. I felt I needed to use,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had a bunch that were just fun that I liked the idea of them. Some that hadn't really shown up in games or anything like that. I just really wanted to do some fun, different stuff with them. So I pretty much just kind of built a wish list of um, this is the challenge. These are the characters. These are the hurdles they're going to have to go over. This is what's going to happen when they get split up, and here's our end result. And yeah, it was. Yeah, I didn't really feel any real strong dictate of like I have to have this stuff. And it kind of just it came together like I've been running games for a long time. It was just sort of like I was running a game for myself for the most part. Um, I think the hardest part was keeping straight how there were a lot of characters in that book, and it was the hardest part was just keeping straight the personalities and giving them their own voice and the room to breathe and a little bit and keep it from getting too cluttered. Um, and it became a lot easier after that.
We've chatted a lot with people who are game masters and
Hmm.
game writers in the RPG world who also write books, write novels,
Hmm.
write short stories. What do you see the big differences between running a game as a GM and putting that together and putting together a story that's basically the same ideas?
Every every player worth their salt has got a little bit of crazy in them, has got a little bit of wildcat, who's going to like go off on some weird tangent and do something completely unexpected. And the difference between writing a book by myself and running a game with, let's say, six other people is I've got six other possibilities of someone doing something I never would have seen coming. And I love it. I'm one of those game masters who really loves to roll with the punches of like something unorthodox they've came up. I don't know if you've had Rosemary Jones on the show. Rosemary Jones, who writes for Arkham Horror, has done fabulous books for Arkham Horror, and she's written a bunch of Wizards of the Coast D&D books too. She was in one of my games, and she had a ranger who kept getting attacked by dogs, just random chance, anything dog-like. She was always getting bit by these dogs. She created a squeaky ball. It's like I want to do I want to do a seal bladder and I fill it with air. And it's like, so you want to create a squeaky ball? She's like, yes. I'm like, there's no rules for it, but sure, that's crazy. And the next time the wolf showed up, she like squeaked it and threw it, and it drew them off her for like 2 rounds, and it was great. There's no rules for that. There's nothing I could have ever planned for, but you just kind of got to leave yourself open to nature's little surprises.
When
And
you're writing this,
I'll find those when I'm writing for myself, but the more people in the soup, the better.
I was going to ask you, when you try writing, do you try to replicate that randomness or that I totally didn't expect that when you're writing your stories? Make sure to fit a few of those in there.
Yeah, and I think that happens. I tend to be a somewhat random person myself, and oftentimes I've learned to stop writing in the evenings because my brain doesn't cycle down. It just like a hamster wheel that keeps spinning and
Right.
keeping me awake and awake. Um, if I've had a really good writing session, uh, anytime during the day, there will be some point where I'm sitting there and ideas will start circling, and I'll come up with something weird I hadn't thought of before. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way to do that. That's a different way of doing that I hadn't approached. Like I've got a big fight in the novel I'm writing now that I set the fight up and I didn't know how I was going to resolve it whatsoever. And something weird came to me while I was falling asleep listening to some very strange music. And I'm like, that's it. That's what I need. I need one of these ancient artifact weapons that this person's got. It doesn't fire bullets, it fires the idea of bullets. And ideas can't be stopped, so she'll be able to shoot through the wall.
Oh,
Like, okay, great, let's do it.
let's do
So
it. Yeah.
so I mean that was accidental. That wasn't anything planned. It wasn't anything in my outlines are I do outlines, but they're not heavily detailed.
Okay.
So I always leave myself open to some surprise, and that was a surprise for me.
Has that process changed for you over the years from when you first got started to now, as far as like
It's
outlines and prep work?
They become a little more loose. I mean, I have to have an outline if I'm writing anything longer than a short story. I just have to. If it's multiple chapters, I need to know because I need to have the cohesive beginning, middle, and end, and I have to have that connective tissue. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And I can stand back and look at it and say, okay, the villain's not particularly strong here. There's no sense of them. How do I work that back in? What helped was writing a mystery novel. I wrote a mystery novel, and I realized what I needed to do was I needed to write it. I needed to set in the clues. I needed to go back to show where they were, and then I needed to build in the red herring. So I kind of went through that back and forth like 3 times, and that absolutely changed how I write books. I can leave the outlines a little more vague. It's like more less vague than like something happens, but this is what the scene needs to accomplish, and how it's accomplished. I don't necessarily know until I get there.
It is funny how many authors we have on the show that have gone and tried their hand at doing a mystery, something that's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily in their wheelhouse. And they've said very similar things to you that after they've done mystery, very specifically, that it changes their outlook on how to tell a story. And it's great that just once again, we see that
Yeah.
again. It's just, guys, if you want to write, go write a mystery.
And honestly, even if you want to write science fiction or fantasy or anything like that, don't just read science fiction and fantasy. When I first started reading more YA books, I was reading a lot of Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew and Three Investigators, and I loved mystery books. And I went through a big chunk where I read a bunch of Harlan Coben, Myron Bolitar novels, and a bunch of Patricia Cornwell mystery novels. They're they're different. I mean, they're different from reading the other stuff, but they still have their tropes and they still have their structure. And learning those structures just by exposure, it's applicable. You can apply it to other places, to no matter what you write. And so yeah, it changed. I mean, I've tried writing ever. I've written westerns. I've written
Right.
everything. So
Cthulhu Erotica.
Cthulhu erotica.
Cthulhu Erotica.
That was that was a real accidental anthology, and that would not have happened without Twitter.
That's hilarious.
There was a conversation on Twitter about fantasy romance, horror romance, and lines that hadn't been crossed. And someone came up with this idea of what about zombie erotica? And someone came up with the title of Rigor Mortis. And everyone in this chain was like, oh my God, I hate myself, but I might have an idea for that. So a whole bunch of us got busy, started writing. Someone put it together. Someone volunteered to edit it, and they decided they were going to publish it. And they put it together, and they did Rigor Mortis. And a subset of people from that got involved in the conversation of, well, what's next? What else? What else can we do? How about Cthulhu? And I'm like, oh damn! I am ashamed that I have an idea for that too. So I wrote so so I wrote the Fishwives of Sean Broley, which I love in that it's a very effective story. I really love that anthology. There's some great people who are in that collection with me. Um, but it's also one of the stories I've never sent out for reprints. I don't want to get that reprinted because it's also really mean, and I don't necessarily need to put that back out in the world. But I'm really happy that I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I ran into I made a friend at a writing convention in Seattle area who I'd run into in the coffee house shortly before the convention started, and she was reading Cthulhu erotica in the coffee house, and I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. And then she showed up at my reading about 3 hours later, and turns out she was reading my story because she knew she was going to the reading. And we've been good friends now since for a while now. But I'm like, that's not. I do not want that story to be anyone's introduction to me. It is not represented. That main character is a horrible person. He's a horrible person. I made Felicia Day go ick. She probably have a restraining order on me out against me because of having to read that for the Vaginal Fantasy Book Club.
No, you're fine. You're
Oof,
fine.
yeah, there's the YouTube clip of her responding to that is one of the weird dark badges I've got as an author. I provoked a reaction. Yeah,
Right.
better or worse.
What are the pros and cons, since we're talking about anthologies,
Mm-hmm.
from an author's point of view? What are the pros and cons to joining and becoming part of an anthology?
Um, the biggest pros for me are one is exposure. As long as people are, the problem is there's a lot of anthologies, but if that anthology gets picked up and it gets seen, it'll at least get seen by the friends and family of the other people who are in the book. So you're going to be reading stories by people you've probably not read before. And you'll have people reading your story who probably would not have read your story somewhere else necessarily, unless you're in a major print magazine or something. So the sort of introduction threshold's pretty low. Um, one of the things I really liked when I was doing a lot of anthology work, I like writing to a theme. And frequently there'd be, okay, this one is, our concept is rock and roll is dead. And we have to base it on some sort of rock and roll song. So I wrote a song based on David Bowie's Rock and Roll Suicide that involved basically the ghost of Kurt Cobain. And I love it. I love the story. And it would have never happened had I not had that specific prompt of, okay, write a story based on X. And so I've had a lot of stories that have shown up out that never would have been conjured had it not been to satisfy someone else's weird whim. So that's huge. As far as cons are concerned, um, once it's out, oftentimes the editors will, once the anthology is out, they do the quick round of promotion for it, and then it's gone. And no one remembers it, and no one's out there promoting it because you don't have any one single author promoting their own book again and week in and week in and week out. And
Right.
the editors always moved on to the next thing. So when I met Eric Scott DeBee and we were both in this anthology called Close Encounters of the Urban Kind, and it was a great anthology, and I really loved the stuff in there. And I was in there, Rosemary Jones was in it, and I loved the story, and I've wanted to adapt it to a screenplay forever. My short story in that got an honorable mention in the year's best horror, which I had not expected. And then I ran into Ellen Datlow at World Fantasy that year and introduced myself as Head High, and I mentioned, is like, yeah, I had a story in X, and thank you for enjoying it. And she was like, I always wondered what happened to that anthology. It just came out and then it disappeared. Like, yeah, it happens. It
Yeah.
happens. I don't know whether it's the publisher or the editor or just the slew of so many anthologies, themed anthologies going through that you have a couple months to strike, and then if it
Yeah.
doesn't catch, it doesn't catch.
Yeah, they move on to the next thing or whatever
Move on to the next thing,
the
yeah.
case is.
Which is fine. I mean, the story's still out there, and I still have the story. So
Yeah, right. Going back a little bit to
Mhm.
Cobalt City.
Okay.
There
You're
was
always
a
welcome to
point,
go back to Cobalt City.
I kind of figured you wouldn't have any problem going back to that.
Nope.
How did you get to the point where you're like, hey, we're going to bring on other authors. We're going to bring on other writers. You know, you mentioned Eric Scott DeBee, who's written for Cobalt City.
Yeah, I've read a bunch of stuff for it. Yeah.
How did you go, okay, I need to have other authors working on this? How did that come about?
The after I did my very first Cobalt City writing, there were people in the game group who I was playing with who were considering themselves writers, who were writers. And I really wanted to invite them to play in the sandbox also. I mean, some these people created these characters. I wanted them to share the stories of these characters. And I opened it up for them. It's like, hey, I don't know whether we're going to publish it or what we're going to do with it. I mean, at that point, I originally published Cobalt City Blues as a gift for people who are for friends and get people who were in the game. And it just took on its own life. Um, and they liked the idea, but none of them ever wrote anything for it. Although one of them is going to be writing a Worm Queen erotica at some point. So I'm excited about that. That'll be fun.
Okay.
Um, because yeah, she's very prolific on AO3 and she's quite good. Um, but I'd open up for people and they weren't really that interested in just doing the work and doing the writing. And after I'd done a couple of books, it was Rose again. It was Rosemary Jones. I made some joke comment about writing something for Christmas, the Cobalt City story for Christmas. And she said that's a great idea. We could all write stories for Christmas, Cobalt stories for Christmas. So the very first anthology was Cobalt City Christmas, and a bunch of people just contributed stuff. And I don't know if it necessarily holds up, but there's some good stuff in there, and it was fun. And it was sort of this proof that like we can do this sort of thing. We can share, we can interweave these stories together because I mean it's like comic books. Comic book
Right.
universes are multiple authors working in the same world, telling their own variants of what's going on in this in the city's history and the story, and they focus around their own characters, and but it's all kind of interconnected. And I grew up reading comic books, and I wanted this to be comic books without the pictures.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate in finding some people who I found some suckers who were willing to put in the work, and I can't stop them now. Like I can't. Eric's a machine.
He is.
Yeah, Amanda Cherry, she's a machine. Yeah, people are just, and it makes me happy that people are contributing their own take on it. If I've done nothing else as an author in my entire life, I've created Cobalt City, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff out there, and it makes me happy.
What sets Cobalt City apart from other superhero everything?
Um, a couple of things are one, there's tradition in history. So the first superhero started around the Revolutionary War period, the very first Huntsman, and it's more focused on legacies than on eternal characters, because you'll have these situations like Batman's been around for 80 years now at this point,
Right.
and he's got to be getting tired. I'm still frustrated that when they did the death of Batman, that they didn't just let Batman become Dick Grayson and kill Bruce Wayne, but DC would never do that.
Right.
um, Cobalt City, there's consequences. There are very few immortal characters, and they're known as immortal characters. Everyone else is they're here for a period of time until they get old, or they break their bodies down, or they die, and then maybe someone else will pick up the mantle. Maybe someone will create a new mantle. So there's a lot of there's a level of realism for that. It's a little bit grittier, uh, and yeah, grittier. The legacy, the long history of stuff. Um, Most of the stuff that I write specifically tends to be lower end. It tends to be more street level to medium level. None of the huge Superman punching planets or lifting battleships.
Right.
The high powered superheroics. I've never really gotten into that very much, but it's nice to see other people who are doing that. Eric got his Lady Vengeance stuff, who has some very strong characters, but um, oh, also there's a thread of Cthulhu mythos. There's a thread of Cthulhu mythos running through the Cobalt City stuff because it's
There's
set
got
in
to
New
be.
England anyway. So I mean, I've got Innsmouth as a neighborhood in Cobalt City up in the north.
Um, what is it that draws the audience members to Cobalt City and keeps them coming back? Because as you said, different genres, different writers, different people, but it's
Mm-hmm.
all still superhero. But a lot of it's like you get a lot of repeat readers.
We do, and I don't know. I wish I did. I wish I could bottle that. I they like the style. They like one of the reasons I started doing it is I feel that we all need heroes, and superheroes are like our myths. There are modern myths. There are Zeus and Hermes and such, and there's something mythic about that I think appeals to people, something they can more immediately relate to because they're dealing with a lot of real world stuff. Like Greetings from Buena Rosa, the first Gato Loco novel, was dealing with problems in the Mexico border, with corrupt sheriffs and people being forced into confession for murders they didn't commit just so they could clear some arrest records and such. And it was just something I got off an NPR article, and I'm like, this town needs a hero. This place needs a hero, and I wrote a book because they needed a hero, and I think people respond to that. Also, For the most part, they're fun. They're fun. And they're often kind of funny. Most of the writers who write for us have some nice, fun, funny moments.
What do you feel is a genre that you'd like to have that hasn't been done yet in regards to Cobalt City?
In
Something.
regards to Cobalt City, I've toyed with it myself. I've always I mean, there's always a science fiction element when you deal with superheroes
Hmm.
because they're dealing with next level technology and our current thing. But I'd like to see some more future science fiction stuff done for Cobalt City. It's just it's 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 impossible to predict where things are going and what's happening, and writing that kind of science fiction is something I've never felt necessarily good doing.
Right.
So it's nothing I've wanted to tackle myself, but I'd love to see some. I would love to see what does the city of superheroes look like in 100 years. If assuming everything's still around in 100 years, who knows? I mean, there's things trying to destroy Cobalt City all the time.
Right. Like a Batman
Um,
Beyond ish version of
yeah,
Cobalt City.
yeah. Also, and thankfully there's a multiverse thing called the coil, so you've got alternate realities that's been well established because I love alternate realities.
Right.
I would love to see a post-apocalypse story happen there too. I think that could be really fun too with heroes in the post-apocalypse. But haven't done anything with those yet. Maybe one of these days. Actually, probably after seeing this, some of these authors will be contacting me saying, "Okay, so I've got this idea for Stardust in the post-apocalypse." Oh, damn it. Okay, I became a small publisher because these people had these ideas and I had to do something about it. So yeah, I'm my phone's gonna be blowing up from calls from Rosemary any minute, I'm sure.
How do you balance the continuity of the world, or do you just kind of
Woo!
whatever
Um,
it is will be?
we've got a number of documents. We've got a wiki that I maintain pretty religiously, that has the neighborhoods and locations and bits of history. It's got a list of all the characters, the years they were active, their rough ages, their various legacies that you tap into. As far as keeping continuity for, well, we can't do this here because this happened previously, so that character's not around anymore. Don Vogel from DEF CON 1 Publishing, who is releasing all of the books these days, she's a great continuity editor, and she's really been on top of saying it's like, okay, we can't have this person showing up here because this person's dead. So they were busy doing X. So we need to think of something else, and that's been invaluable. But most of it's we're organized on a wiki and a big timeline, which we've got on I think a Google Doc somewhere of every important thing that's happened for 250 years.
That's something for me as a reader and as a fan of stuff is the continuity. It's very important to come in and be like, well, this doesn't. You see one thing, it's like, well, that doesn't make sense,
Yeah,
and then it ruins the whole, the whole immersion thing. So that's really
yeah.
great that you have all of that already
Oh, I'm
set
sure,
up and going.
I'm sure we're missing. I'm sure I've contradicted myself. I'm positive that has happened because I wasn't thinking about there being 30 books
Right.
when I wrote Cobalt City Blues. So I may have said some stuff off the cuff just because it was sounded fun in story context. And I'm now going back and retconning. Like I established the King in Yellow as a bad guy in the as sort of like this cosmic figure in the Cobalt City universe. And just recently I've started redefining exactly what he is, not in the sense of I need him to be something different, but they didn't even understand what he was,
Yeah.
and it gives me that freedom to like, oh no, he's a rogue AI that's went mad because it got disconnected from the rest of the world. He's piloting a city ship shaped like a that's going through the coil that's called Carcosa. He doesn't realize he's not real, but everyone thinks he's real, and that's
Yeah.
enough. That's what matters.
But there's still the attempt of making
There's so
sure, you're
there's absolutely the attempt of the continuity, which is great. And my biggest concern with the continuity is that people might find it intimidating. That they would it's like, I don't know where to start. Where do I start with this? My spouse won't read the Max Gladstone series because of how it's numbered, because it doesn't know what order the books are supposed to go in, and has to read them in order. Like absolutely has to read them in order. There's no order for the Cobalt City stuff. It's like comic books. When I was when you were 12 and you were on the spinner rack, you just picked up a Superman and you picked it up and you read the Superman and it was fine. And it's great that there's all these other connections and there's all this continuity and this deeper lore, but none of it should be necessary to enjoy the book. And I've been very careful. It's always been one of the things I've been very, very careful about is the books need to be able to stand alone. You need to be able to have a satisfying experience front to back in any given book without having to do your homework. No one wants to do the homework. So continuity is great, but um, that's just the extra sauce.
Yeah. You mentioned script writing earlier. Is there a plan to do scripty stuff for Cobalt City? Maybe a series
Ooh,
or
I
movies or anything,
the
or things you
dream
can't talk about?
every time there's that. If you had $10 million, if you were able to greenlight the next big project, um, I've always thought that you could do limited budget um, a limited budget prestige cable series for God of Loco and Snowflake, the Panda sidekick mechanic, and make a really compelling series out of that because it's not heavy special effects. It's a leather clad vigil. It's basically a reskin Batman via Zorro on a motorcycle traveling around the country, fighting wrongs on the like sub routes of America. And you can do that for not a lot of money, and it could be really compelling. And it's a kind of television I used to grow up watching and I used to love. As far as the big stuff, maybe animated. I just feel that there's such a glut of shows and movies right now. It would be very hard for it to stand out. But I think the God of Loco stuff would stand out. And I think if Eric was ever really interested in doing the Lady Vengeance stuff, I think he could probably make that happen too. I think that would work.
For sure. Do you
But
still keep up with script writing at all?
as a matter of fact, yeah, I've got a book that my agent's got in her hands now that's being shopped around called Winter's Lullaby. It's a creepy, slow burn New England horror story, sort of a folk horror of where punk attitude meets folk horror with an aging punk musician. And her agency also has a screenplay division. So I'm adapting that as a screenplay, and I've got 3 drafts down. I need to do another revision on it, but yeah, no, I still do it, and I'm really happy with. I think this would make a great film. Hollywood could call me. Keith David would star. He'd be perfect. Um, so yeah, I still do that because I love the format of it. I like thinking in archetypes and the structure of it. The physical structure of putting it on the page is a nightmare,
Right.
but the way the story comes together, I really enjoy. So yeah, it's I still do it. And every once in a while, I get a call from my screenwriting friend who's out in Cleveland, and it's like, oh, we got interest on X old project. Do you want to take a look and maybe do a rewrite? I'm like, maybe. So we tackle it again every once in a while, send dust them off, send them back out. But yeah, new stuff. Who knows? One of these days. One of these days I'll have the big one. We'll see.
As a
Have the
person who
big screenplay.
writes, as an author who writes, but also
Mm-hmm.
does the screenwriting and script writing
Mm-hmm.
thing, because there's a lot of books to movies adaptations, right?
Yeah,
And you've got a book, and then you got to confine it to the 90 minutes,
yeah,
the hour and a half, the 2 hour, whatever it is,
mm-hmm.
and you have to cut and cut and cut. There are very
Yeah,
few well-known books that go to movies and do just as well or better than that. What do you
yeah.
think the key is to that translation?
It's something I take from being a fan of jazz music is that the movie is just an interpretation of the book. It's a cover of the book. It doesn't need to be a note for note thing. It depends on how much of an improvisation it is on the book as to whether it's a success or a failure. But you've got to make it fit the format. They're very different things. A book gives you the time to delve into the character and do all of that internal things. That's why for a long time I didn't think you could get really great Stephen King movies because so much of what made his books great was this internal logic of why these characters are doing these stupid things, and that doesn't translate well to film. Um, so, if, so I don't mind it being a little bit different. I mind them as long as they're true to the spirit of the story. I think it's great. But they should honestly, the book movie should be its own thing.
Okay.
It's I mean it's a movie that's not a faithful adaptation of the book isn't making the book go away. It's just a different take on the same story, and we're all writing different takes on the same five stories anyway. So I don't think it matters.
I think the writer of Ready Player One agrees because when they made the movies, like it's the same concept, it's the same spirit, but I'm going to change the stuff so that it fits a movie.
Yeah,
So it
yeah.
wasn't a line for line. They changed it enough so that
Oh
they
yeah,
can make it a movie, and I really liked how they did that, and that very
yeah,
much is kind of what you're saying there, and
yeah,
I love it. I
yeah.
agree
It's a
wholeheartedly.
different thing, and it doesn't make any of them. I think the biggest example would be um, uh, why can I not remember the name of it? The Jeff Vandermeer book. Um, that they got turned into a movie with Natalie Portman. Uh, I can't even remember it all of a sudden. With Area X, the first in the Area X things,
Okay,
Area X books. Uh,
Annihilation.
Annihilation. Thank you. It's
Thank
like
you,
it
Gabriel
starts with
Harvey.
an A. Yeah, starts with an A. I know that much. I loved the book. Absolutely loved the book. It was one of those. I think I actually said on Twitter after I finished it that I wanted to find Jeff Vandermeer and eat his brain and gain his magic. Because that it was just it was such an incredible book. Just really absolutely pulled you in and invented this absolutely weird stuff that you could not absolutely that you could never believe that you never believe fell out of a human head, but it all made sense in there. I
Right.
loved it. And I saw the movie. Now I love the movie. Very different story. It's got the same general concept. 4 or 5 experts go into this strange area, but what they do with it completely different. And it stands on its own. I think it's a really solid movie. It's a real trippy watch, and it doesn't need to be a faithful adaptation to be good. But I understand the people who are frustrated with it. I'm just not one of those people.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
Mm,
Let's swing back over to RPGs for a moment
sure,
because there's so many things that you and I we can sit here and pick a topic and talk for hours.
probably yeah.
What is your thoughts on the current landscape of RPGs? Because years ago when you and I were doing role
Hmm.
playing, there was one, two, three, maybe four really well known RPGs.
Hmm.
But now everybody's got an RPG, and they're
Oh,
all
tons of stuff.
different, and they all fit their own little niche.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that? And do you wish there were more? Do you wish there were less? Do you wish
I
anything?
I I think the more RPGs, the better. I actually created a Cobalt City RPG that where you could write the character on the back of a business card because it was very rules light. Because I wanted to be stories heavy. I didn't want to be bogged down in the rules. Um, I I I'm a little saddened that there's some people who all they think role playing is Dungeons and Dragons. It's a great gateway. It's a very popular, very well-known gateway. There's lots of inroads to get involved with it, to watch the live plays, watch these other things, and it's got a very extensive world and a very extensive history, and that's awesome. But it doesn't end there. There's a lot of other there's better fantasy role-playing games. There's well, I can't think of any right off the top of my head, sadly. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of there's fantasy. There's a whole bunch of different genres that they've never done, and I'm a huge fan of the storyteller games. Things like oh, Monster High, I think was one of them. Just like you got a little booklet, it's a little thing. It's very rules light. Um, and then the Bulldogs role playing game that I worked on with Brandon Taylor. Um, it was yeah, I think the more people we have telling different kinds of stories using the mechanics that suit them, because the D&D mechanics, that was the problem with D&D Modern during fourth edition, is you get a high level character and you get involved in. I ran a high level character game, and there was a gunfight in a hallway where a person got shot like 40 times and didn't fall down just because those rules don't really
Right.
scale. It's not the best rule system for that sort of thing. It's fine for D&D. It's not great for more modern. We need different systems for that. So I think finding the system that suits the story you want to tell is huge, and there's so many options that um, it can be overwhelming. That's why it's so great that there's podcasts out there that are they're doing the good work of bringing these new other games to people's attention and highlighting them and showing people that they have other options because there's it's a golden age. It is a golden age to be a role playing nerd. It
Yeah.
really is.
Is
I
there a
mean,
system you haven't gotten to play yet that you're like, I really want to play that?
oh, there's so many. There's so many. The one I got to check off most recently was Morkborg. I've got to run a few Morkborg games, which is just it's a blast. It is so comically grimdark. It is adorable. And I'm going to be playing Exalted for the first time ever, and it's the new third edition rules, which are sort of streamlined because I guess they've been very complicated and Byzantine in the
Yeah.
past. But I'm going to be doing a actual play in that starting July, I believe. I think we record our first episode in July,
Okay.
which will be a lot of fun because I've always wanted to play that sort of wuxia high fantasy type stuff, and so
Yeah, and you'll
that'll
have
be
to
great.
keep me apprised of that so I can like share links and
Oh, absolutely, yeah,
send people to go listen and watch and all that, whatever media it's going to be available on.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I'm excited about that because I've the last 3 4 years I've become absolutely addicted to Chinese dramas and Asian dramas, and so I get to channel some of that, Fangs of Fortune energy and some of the uninvited, yeah, just it's untamed energy, Word of Honor energy. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
I try to remember to ask this question to everybody who role plays. Do you prefer to be a player or a game master? And why?
Um, I think I prefer to be a game master. I love playing. I absolutely love playing. If I've got a DM who I trust, and I've got a couple who I trust, and I can find a character I'm enjoying, I really like playing. Uh, but it's such a different world. Like I'm a world builder. I love creating worlds.
Yeah.
I've created like whole religion systems that I've translated over to a bunch of different campaign settings and some fiction settings actually. Rooks to Ravens is actually set in one of my game worlds that I created. And honestly, I think having that overall ability to shape what the world looks like and the tone, and then being able to handpick the players to help convey that, I think that's hard to beat. It's
Yeah.
really hard to beat. No matter how much fun I have playing, yeah, it's hard to beat that.
Okay. Fair enough. When it comes to tabletop role playing and just worlds in general, whether
Hmm.
it's something like a Star Wars, Marvel,
Hmm.
D&D, Mutants and Masterminds, is there any of those that you'd like to work with and either do like a novel for, or tie-in fiction for, or an anthology for officially? Which ones are kind of on
Officially,
your list?
ooh, um, yeah, absolutely. Sadly, some of the ones that I used to love playing are just that I had the most interesting ideas for. Those game systems aren't even around anymore. Like, is Gamma World still a thing? Does anyone remember Gamma World?
Gamma
Uh,
World, no.
uh, there was a Gamma Worlds inspired board game that I used to love that I played that all the time. Um, as far as any that are current and ongoing and stuff like that, I am intimidated by writing for like Wizards of the Coast, like D&D or any of the big fantasy things, because I feel that those are best suited for rule wonks, people who are really understand the rules very well, and I understand them enough to tell the story I want to tell. But I don't need to have someone rule checking that to get in the way of the story I want to tell.
Yeah.
I would love to write some Call of Cthulhu stuff. Um, Eddie, just Chaosium, get at me. Uh, Call of Cthulhu is probably high on my list because I've always had that sort of bend for horror. Um, I don't know if the game is still around. There's a Swedish Scandinavian game called Kult, Kult,
Okay.
that I absolutely loved, and I think that would make for great fiction. I would love to write for that, but I don't even know if they're still around. Um, yeah, something with a little bit of a horror aspect. I
All
think
right.
actually I could do some really fun stuff with Morkborg also.
Borg. I haven't heard that one in a while either.
Oh, yeah, Morkborg. It's visually it is such a fascinating. It's the layout of it was worth getting just for the layout of the book. But
Right.
yeah, it's just so easy to put together a character and run just an unhinged short game. Yeah, Morkborg's a delight.
That's great. So as we're starting to tie it down here,
Hmm.
I wanna talk about some of your recent stuff. We've been talking about Cobalt City off and on
Yeah.
throughout the way. Tell us a little bit about Mad World, the Mad World cycle, what that's about, what people can look for in that series, because I know you just had the whole set just kind of
Yeah,
got put
yeah.
out together.
Um, the Mad World was sort of an opportunity. So the King in Yellow is seen as this avatar of madness, and he's always been trying to find this way in to take over Cobalt City and the iteration, this version of reality. And he's always been set up as this bad guy with this ultimate plan for like 20 years. I've had this guy sitting around, guy. Um, and it was time to start sort of paying that off. So this was going to be the big final push of what are certain ways that group madness, like madness of a culture, sort of sets in. What are sort of things that feed into that? What are ways that those are sort of expressed? And um, that was a way for me to tell shorter, just novella length. About I think the longest is maybe 30,000, 35,000 words, uh, where I just focused on a couple of characters dealing with a specific problem that were all standalone stories, but all linked together to tell this bigger narrative of madness creeping up in Cobalt City.
Okay.
And ironically, the final one, Vote for Stardust, came out in, I believe, December of last year. And and it was built on that concept of politics makes people crazy. And proof of that was in the election about a month before the book came out. So yeah, it's been a surreal moment. But yeah, it would allow me to tie a lot of loose ends together and have showcase a bunch of characters that I hadn't really been able to showcase before, and do a bunch of different kinds of smaller stories. One was definitely more science fiction oriented and dealt with the space elevator and um, that question of what. And throughout that series, I found myself questioning what is a superhero. Is a superhero someone with powers who upholds the status quo? Because the status quo is broken. If the status quo is broken, then who are the heroes?
Right.
What does it mean to what does it mean to be a hero when if all you're doing is protecting, big businesses and the elites? How does that, and I just ended up changing the perspective of some of those characters. And that sort you'll see that happen throughout the book. By the time you get to book 3 with Mad Jack and Kara Sparks, there's that question of like, I'm a scientist. I'm a rock star. I'm a star. I want to help people. I don't want to fight supervillains. That is not my thing. I am not a hero. But I can do something. And I think that's ultimately what heroes are, people who see a problem and they step in to fix it. Um, and it was my own way of dealing with superhero fatigue, I think, in a way. You gotta stand for something. It's not just people in spandex punching other people in spandex. There's real world concerns and real world causes and things like that. And uh, I think I reflected that a little bit in those books a bit. My favorite of them, by the way, is Carcosa View, because the cover has a picture of the Smith Tower from Seattle that my partner did for all the covers for, and it has my team of Monster Smash with Bog Witch and Ghost House. I just love those guys. It's a rollick, a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Guys, can everybody people can go and find that where they get their
Yeah,
books. It's all over
yeah,
Amazon and books. You can order it at your shop, all that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
totally,
You can do the individual standalone novellas. Only releases ebooks, but then we released all 4 of them into one collection as a print, so you can get that anywhere. And yeah, Mad World Cycle. It was a lot of fun, and it's all stands alone, which is nice too. So
that's great. Do you have any other works, things that you're working on, things that are coming out, things you people can go and get their hands on coming up?
if you want some real deep dive Cobalt City stuff, I have a Patreon. I had a Patreon. I haven't published much for it recently, but it's like $1. As low entry fee as $1, and you can read all the archives. And I've got, I don't know, like 30, 40 Cobalt City short stories in there, and that's actually some of my favorite Cobalt City stuff that I've done. All these nice little standalones. And those are really cool. And maybe I'll get back in and get some more stuff written. I've been so busy with school and trying to crack the screenplay and other things that I haven't been able to do very many of those. But I think those are great. Um, Other than that, I've got the book that Gabrielle is shopping right now. I've got the new book that I'm working on, which is a diesel punk alt-world fantasy with a bunch of senior women as the heroes, because I don't figure they get their stories told often enough, about a bunch of women who like help topple the kingdom and establish a king after some tyrant had taken over, and 20 years later realize the person they installed was an idiot and need to get the band back together and go fix it. And it's just my it's sort of my Streets of Fire meets Mad Max Fury Road
Okay,
with a bunch of 50-year-old women in the lead.
that's
So
great.
yeah, I love it. I'm having a blast writing it. My soundtrack for writing is all like 80s butt rock. It's incredible.
Well, maybe we'll have to talk a little bit when we go off in our post podcast Q&A with the live stream audience and ask about music and some of that other stuff that
Sure.
influences you. So that's the reason that people should be listening to the live streams. You get your own questions that you get to throw in there.
Absolutely.
You mentioned you're going to be part of that podcast coming up. So when you find out about that, we'll share all that information to our audience as well. You're going to be at Seattle Worldcon in August 13th through
That's
the 13th through the 17th, correct?
That is correct. I have no idea what panels I'm going to be on. In theory, I'm still on some panels, but it's all madness now. So we'll see what happens when it gets closer.
Okay. Sounds
But
good.
I'll definitely be there.
There we go. People can keep their eye out for you. People can find your website, nathan-crowder.com, correct? Or hyphen,
correct.
I guess. Is it the hyphen?
I guess technically a hyphen, yeah. Didn't used to have a hyphen, but we updated the site recently, and now there's a hyphen.
Now there's a hyphen. That's right. I tried to go to the old version, and it wouldn't let me. I was like, okay, fine. Here's the hyphen. Yeah. This is the one he sent me via email. That's the one I'm going to.
Yeah, WordPress and I exchanged some words.
Yeah.
So yeah,
understandable. And of course, you're on a Blue Sky at Nate Crowder.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a cool little thing you're doing on TikTok at Nate.Crowder on TikTok. Nate.Crowder. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about that at all? What you're doing there?
So shortly after the surprise in the election, well, surprise for some, I guess. Shortly after the election, I saw a woman on Blue Sky comment that we don't need pundits explaining how we got here. We need sociologists and history teachers and social science people to explain what is happening, because I think that because she's like, because the world's moving fast, there's a lot of confusion about the underlying structures of civil society and what is happening and what happened here, and it would really benefit to have people explaining that. So I took that as a challenge. I'm finishing my degree in integrated social sciences. I'll be finishing this winter, and I put together a short series on TikTok that I do called the Antisocial Handbook for the Social Sciences, where I pick a small subject and I talk about it for, I don't know, 2 to 4 minutes, fairly short. Put it up once a week, and I'll talk about anything from history of Los Angeles to concepts on urban planning, highway systems. I'm a big social science nerd, and it's an opportunity for me to share little bits and pieces of things that are underlying the world that people just don't know or don't understand or never thought to question. And I don't make judgments. I just give the history and the explanation for this is what this type of political system means. You can make your own conclusions.
That's awesome.
And it's been great. It feels like I've been able to participate in making TikTok less of a toxic environment.
Right.
There's been so much of misinformation spread on there, and people are finding their information and their news on there. And I'm like, that's where people are going. That's where I'll put the stuff.
There you go.
Maybe it'll get you a few people and educate a few people. It'll be awesome.
So people can find you there at Nate.Crowder.
Yes.
Nate, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you being here. Of course, we're going to do the Q&A for all of the people in all of the live streams here in a little bit as well. So people that are watching, stick around for that. If you're listening on the podcast as well. Coming up on Epic Realms, we're going to be joined by Haley Spencer. She's a speculative fiction writer and poet whose new poetry collection is also kind of sort of a choose your own adventure from what I understand. So she's going to be joining us on June 30th. That podcast will be available on July 1st. Also coming up, game designer Mike Selinker is going to be joining us. Coming back, he was our first episode, and he is our 100th episode. So please join us for that. Of course, we're going to have author Lenore Woods is going to be joining us, as well as RPG legend Jeff Grubb as well. So like, follow, rate, review. Click all of those buttons. Guys, those ratings and those reviews are crucial to everything that we do and to this show and to our guests. So go ahead and do all of that. And for Nathan Crowder, I am Nick, and I want to thank you all for listening to Epic Realms.